In this episode, you'll learn why today's transformation leaders need more than just tech expertise, the real challenges organisations face when updating legacy systems, and how embracing continuous change is crucial as AI disrupts the industry. Join us as Ash Gawthorp, Chief Academy Officer at Ten10, shares insights that every change leader needs to hear. Welcome to the Transformation Leaders Podcast, your go-to source for insights and strategies in organisational change and transformation. I'm Tony Lockwood, your host and founder of the Transformation Leaders Hub, a global community dedicated to advancing excellence in change leadership. With over 25 years of experience in driving successful transformations, I'm here to share actionable advice and engage in conversation with industry experts to help you navigate and lead impactful change within your organisation. Welcome to this episode of the Transformation Leaders Podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Ash Gawthorp, the Chief Academy Officer at Ten10. And I'm sure Ash will tell us a little bit more about what Ten10 do in a second. But without further ado, welcome Ash. Great to have you on board today and on this episode. Can we start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you first got into change and transformation?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for inviting me on this, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Ash, one of the co-owners at Ten10, the Chief Academy Officer. So I look after our Ten10 Academy, which is all about bringing early talent into our business to then employ them in technical roles. My background is in hardware engineering and software engineering, so I come at this very much from the practitioner side. Essentially, and I've done a number of various roles over the years, quite sort of non-linear in terms of my career path, I guess, and that's kind of how I've found myself in this position. But really, we got involved in this as a means of populating our own early careers within our own consulting organisation. So Ten10 is primarily a technical consultancy, where ultimately change is at its heart. If there's no change or transformation going on, then generally you don't really need a consultancy. And we built this model to essentially meet changing requirements we saw. And I know that what we're seeing are those requirements are becoming ever more important nowadays in terms of that change in AI. But even back then, sort of 12 years ago, when we first ran this or first started thinking about doing it, we saw a change in the market where it went from individuals that were very technically focused to challenges around you still needed people with that tech focus, but you also needed people who could collaborate, who could influence, who can get on with a wide variety of different people and communicate at the right time, at the right level, and ultimately really sort of take people on a journey, I guess. Lots of people have great ideas and great technical solutions, but if you can't get people on board, take them on that journey and implement that change, then there's almost no point in having the idea.
Absolutely, totally agree with that. I think that's so important to remember that whatever you do, organizations are made up by people, process, technology, and data. But also often the focus is the technology and the data, forget that process, and actually people just happen. And it's the opposite way, isn't it? It's an analogy many times over my career around technology projects, and the easiest thing in the world is to get the icon on the screen. That's project management, isn't it, in its truest sense? But the hardest thing is to get someone to click on that icon, and if someone clicks on it, you don't get the benefit because you haven't got people to change what they've always done. So we'll delve into that a lot more in as we progress on the podcast. But the first question that we do on every episode is, how do you define transformation?
I guess for me, transformation is very closely linked to change, essentially taking something from state A to state B. And the journey, the processes involved in that, and to the point you made earlier, you've got people, you've got tech, you've got process, you've got data, and all of that needs to come together in order to be able to be transformed. But I think certainly early in my career, so much of that was focused on the tech side, whereas now I realise that far more of that, and I think the industry is getting to that point, is around hearts and minds and people, and sort of really taking people along with you. To your point, fine putting an icon on the screen, but if you're not getting people to click on it, you may as well not bother, essentially. I think for me, that's the crux of it, and that's an area where we see quite a lot of change.
No, I agree, and I think that's that view of being clear about where you're heading towards. For the B, we've got a good idea of where we are now, A, but moving to point B is critical from a transformation perspective. So in terms of what you do at the moment, then, as Chief Academy Officer, talk to me a little bit about that and what your day-to-day activities look like.
Sure, yes. So my day-to-day is mainly spent speaking with our customers, so organisations that are working with us to essentially implement change within their organisation. And in my area, it's particularly focused around the people side. So really around identifying and bringing individuals into an organisation who come from a wide variety of different backgrounds, but who have the aptitude for tech, and really sort of training those individuals and matching those individuals with the requirements that the customer is actually looking for, with a view to them then joining the business, forming part of those teams, and then ultimately becoming the permanent employees of those organizations. And one thing we're definitely seeing is a change in the roles that people are looking for. I think if we go back a while, you had, certainly when I started my career, if you had a development team, for example, you could pretty much lock them away in a room, sort of slide a pizza under the door every day, and sort of 6 months later, you'd have a product pop out at the end. Now, whether it was the right product or whether it was what you actually envisaged is often not really what you were hoping for. But I think those were the expectations, and you didn't let those people sort of work with the business. The BA was a very separate role, and I think we're seeing a lot of blending of that. We're seeing a lot of organizations where they're looking for individuals who can do more than just one thing. So a customer-facing techie. And also conversely, actually, a lot of roles traditionally where individuals didn't require any tech skills, where organizations are looking for people to be able to do that, and to be able to do the technical side as well to some extent. I mean, that example you talked about there, project and putting an icon on the screen. I remember when I started out as a software developer, just to get Windows to do that was really quite complicated. You needed to know an awful lot about the internals of how that computer worked and have to write some really quite complex code, things that you just should never need to worry about to do something real, like open a window and put an icon on the screen. But you had to know that back then. Now that's very different. Now, automation's been more of a thing, so I guess that leads into AI as well. But automation means that a lot of the skills that were very, very specialized are now able to be done by individuals who aren't so technically focused. You still need to be careful, because you can still make mistakes which will paint you in a corner really badly and make the product not workable in 6 months. But the actual level of code that you're having to write has sort of significantly reduced. So you get this idea of what's called a sort of citizen developer, the idea that an individual who isn't necessarily a dev, or if you said to them, what can you do? They wouldn't say, oh, I'm a dev, but they can create apps. But in doing that, they therefore need to be able to do a little bit of all sorts. They need to be able to speak to the business, act as a BA, need to be able to understand those requirements, need to be able to build an app, need to be able to test it, need to be able to deploy it, release it. So almost like a sort of mini sort of individual responsible for that. And I think we're going to see more and more of that as well in the industry. We've already started to see AI's impact on that in terms of automation, in terms of removing some of the roles that, not removing, but allowing all individuals to augment their skill set with skill sets that a few years ago were very, very specialized and not something that people were able to do.
Yeah, it's quite interesting though, isn't it? As you say, that sort of merging of roles. From my own perspective, a lot of my career has been creating that bridge between the business and technology, and helping the technology understand what the business requirements are, and converting the business requirements into a bit of tech speak, so you know, people can understand each other, and likewise making sure that whatever the tech teams have delivered actually meet the brief, and again being that bridge. But what you're just saying there, and what I've evidenced is actually the need for a bridge is reducing because people are naturally doing that sort of crossover, and that as you say, that may well be because the coding elements of the tech development now are not as prevalent as they were previously. But I think there's also this general, much more awareness, isn't there, in business of what tech and what apps and automation can do that maybe 15, 20 years ago just wasn't there. Because we've lived with it, haven't we, for so long? Everything's done on a phone these days. If you think about the technology in that, if you go back 15 years, it'd be a massive sort of computer, wouldn't it, in terms of the speed and the capability.
Completely. And to that point, I think smartphones and tablets, I think they've changed people's expectations as well of apps and what they should be able to do. If you go back pre-smartphone era, generally apps were deployed on PCs, on laptops, on servers, and they took an awful long time to do, and they're almost sort of shrouded in a little bit of mystery. Whereas now the expectation is, well, this should just be able to do something, and I think that's often quite complex for organizations where they have also a lot of legacy systems sort of sat there in the background as well. If you think about something like banking, individuals might use one of the new sort of challenger bank apps, like Monzo or something like that, for example, and then they suddenly think to themselves, "Oh, hang on a minute, my traditional bank, they can't do that." And the difference between the fact that the likes of Monzo started with nothing and were able to adopt technology that was there, and the best of breed, sort of cloud native apps deployed in the cloud, running natively on iPhones and tablets, as opposed to well-established banks where they've got architecture, hardware systems going back 20, 30 years or more. Very, very difficult for them to change at that pace. But the expectation is there, and that's what users expect.
No, yeah, it's interesting. My background's in banking, and absolutely, that ocean liner of systems, turning that around and changing it, and being as nimble as you can be in a tug, that the sort of new marketplace are able to do, it's really, really challenging. And why a number of the bigger organizations have actually decided, well, I'll just bring out a sub brand and create a complete new organization to these sort of new starters, new up and coming organizations head on, because they just can't turn the ocean liner around. It's
no, completely. I mean, that ocean line is very stable, and and that's possibly part of the reasoning why it stays as long as it has, but not very agile. And so that's, and I think at some point that's a question the industry is going to have to address, because I think things will be changed, but ultimately, that's.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation a few years ago with head of technology in one of the banks, and that was looking to hive off part of the organisation. I won't talk about this specific organisation, but probably everyone will know. But I remember him saying quite clearly that the challenge that they had in separating the technology was creating lots of problems that was very much in the public domain at the time, because and he described it as just like a spaghetti bowl. He was saying we were unpicking spaghetti and pulling strand, not with our sort of like eyes closed, thinking, "Oh, I hope it's not going to have an impact," because they just
completely
the interdependencies of all these systems, because they've been built up over so many years, and layer upon layer upon layer of new technology had been added to. So they were pulling one strand of spaghetti out, and suddenly things were stopped working, and ATMs weren't working and stuff like that. And in the end, it was a major inhibitor of the separation happening.
I think that's a great analogy. The bowl of spaghetti is trying to unpick it, but in the dark with boxing gloves on. Essentially, it's a complex process, and you're absolutely right in terms of layers of technology being applied, and also a lot of the individuals that first created these systems, the architects that first designed them, aren't aren't with us anymore. And also a lot of the sort of modern engineering practices that we take for granted, like testing frameworks that automatically test code when you make a change to the code. None of that was even conceived as an idea, let alone existed. And yeah, in fact, one thing that's interesting, we often find ourselves with requirements to place people in cutting edge technology, but at the same time, often it's very old legacy technology. If you've got an organization, I won't mention their name, but one example where the average age of particular tech teams it's well north of 55, pushing 60.
Yeah.
And their systems are in languages and tech stacks that just don't exist. They're not taught anymore, aside from maybe a history of computing in a computer science class. But these things are running critical infrastructure, and you need people with those skills. So you almost need, well, you do need, in fact, junior new people entering the business, but trained in some of these older legacy tech. Because to your point, that spaghetti ball is so complex. You're not going to be able to unpick it anytime soon, or at least if you did, the risk of doing that is enormous.
Absolutely, and I've been involved in a number of organisations where, for that very reason, they had very noticeable single points of failure, and it was to individuals that had the tech knowledge, and if they left, a fast approaching retirement age, if they left,
Yep.
then there was no knowledge left within the organisation. And interestingly enough, on a couple of occasions, they felt that the individuals saw the power in that and positioned themselves really, really well. In others,
yes.
foresight, where we need to mitigate this risk because it is a risk. But there is a cliff edge for a lot of organisations, isn't there? That's still got those legacy systems.
Hugely so. I think there are sticking plasters. There's technology like RPA, so robotic process automation, so you can effectively apply a layer of technology on top of that old legacy systems to be able to automate data transfer between them, which is very effective and reduces costs and makes things more efficient. And I guess on the face of it, looking top down from a management board, they may think, well, this is great. We've implemented this technology solution and it's resolved everything. But the underlying fundamental core infrastructure code and tech is still there, and you've still got the same problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So coming back to your point about bringing people in that's naturally moving and sort of overlapping on these business technology roles, just thinking about the people that you bring through the academy that are going down the tech route, how willing are they to do that merge role? Is that becoming more natural for them, or is it still that, well, actually my comfort, I do want to be in a back room in a dark room playing around with code? I'm just trying to get what's the sense? Is that sort of transitioning at the moment, or what's the sense?
It's horses for courses, really. The way in which we do it is we bring people in, we assess them for their technical aptitude and soft skills and their ability to perform in a variety of different roles within tech, and we then train them initially for a period of time, around 2 months, in pretty much everything involved in the software delivery lifecycle. So they end up with a broad knowledge, but more importantly, it exposes them to a little bit of everything. So it allows them to see what they like and what they're good at. Because often people don't know. They'll often join us with a preconceived idea of what they want to do, but it often doesn't really stand up to scrutiny because they don't have any real world experience. So the classic one we often get is, I want to be a developer. Okay, great. Why do you want to be a dev? And when you dig into it a little bit more, often it's a case of, well, it's a role I've heard of in tech. I've heard it's a cool job. I've heard it pays well. I've got a friend that does it. Or the other very common one, and this is good, is that people are saying, well, I've done this 10-minute online course in Python programming, and I've decided that this is now my calling, and I want to spend the rest of my life doing it. Well, that's great. That's lovely. That passion is wonderful. But please do the course, engage in a little bit of everything, and then we'll have another conversation in a couple of weeks where we can work out objectively, after you've been exposed to these different things and what they're like in the real world, what your opinion is then and what sort of roles you think you want to go into. Because often we'll find that a dev, somebody that wants to be a dev, they realize that surprisingly, relatively little of that role as a professional software developer is actually about programming. And at the same time, they'll often say, well, this other thing that I didn't even know existed, I didn't even know businesses even do that. Never heard of it before. I really like that. I'm good at that. And I'd like to do some more of that, please. And off the back of it, we end up with people being sort of on a sort of continuum really of skills and aptitudes. On the one side, you got the business. On the other side, you got the pure tech. And then you've also got people in the middle. So it's really about, it's almost like a sort of it's almost a Harry Potter sorting hat, essentially. But we can't just have them all turn up on day one and work out what's best for them. They have to be exposed to everything first. What we find is that then also tends to mean that individuals are placed in roles which are suited to them. Because I don't know about yourself, but over the years, I've worked with a lot of individuals where they're doing really well in one role, but 25 years down the line, they're saying, oh, you know what, I really wish I'd given that a go. I think I'd have been good at that, but I never got the opportunity to, because I think so many people just almost kind of fall into a role. When you speak with individuals and say, how have you ended up in this particular role as a business analyst, as a developer, as a cloud engineer? There's sometimes it's a case of, well, I took these GCSEs at 14, I did these A-levels, I did a computer science degree, then ended up doing it. But more often than not, there's a bit of a contrived story, but often with a bit of just things that happened that individual found themselves doing it. Well, so really, we just have to apply a bit of rigor to that. Yeah.
No, so it's interesting, and I totally agree. I think that whole concept of understanding at an early age what you want your career to be, it's really challenging. I've got a daughter who's in a final year at university, and she's like, I don't know what I want to do. And we're like, well, don't worry about it, because actually use your 20s to work out what you want to do and then build your career in your 30s and your 40s. But that's a completely different mindset than maybe when I was coming out of school and college, where it's like you've got to get a job for life. And it's like, I don't think a job for life exists anymore, but it's just different generational. It is generational, isn't it, in terms of that different perspective? But it's interesting. I smiled when we were talking about that, because often when I asked the question at the start, how did you first get into change and transformation? I would say at least 80%, if not more, of the responses is I just fell into it. I got involved completely by accident. I got asked to join as a subject matter expert and really enjoyed it, and I've stayed within it. And it is looking at those, getting involved in stuff, understanding and trying to understand and getting involved in as much as you can across an organization, and then suddenly something will sort of attract your attention, and you can move into it, spot the opportunity, move into the opportunity, and if you like it, great, carry on. If you don't, do what you need to do, and then step back and look for the next opportunity. And I think that's the mindset.
Completely. I think you're spot on there in that. Who's it who said that the only constant is change? I think that's very true. You join in one thing, and you can't expect to have that job for life and be doing the same thing anymore. And I think the pace of that change, I think, is speeding up quicker and quicker. There are people doing roles now that 10 years ago, those roles didn't even exist. The idea of, well, certainly and not just within tech, but the idea of influencers and that kind of thing. The platforms didn't exist for those people, for those roles to exist. Mobile. So if you go back sort of to the pre-mid noughties, that just didn't exist at all. And I think we're going to see that more and more. We're going to see that the roles in 10 years' time are going to be completely different. So what's most important is that individuals adopt that kind of learning mindset and recognize that things will change and that they need to do it and embrace it, because where there is change, there's opportunity there. And I think that's one, very interesting thing with AI that's coming down the line. It's multifaceted. There's lots of different layers to it. everybody's talking about it, but only a few individual organisations are really sort of starting to work with it and implement it and sort of get some decent traction with it. But the workforce, the people, they need to go on that journey, and they need to recognise that change is coming. I think when you look historically, we really know, once you've opened Pandora's box and the tech is developed, we've got a terrible track record as humanity of being able to constrain it and sort of keep a lid on Pandora's box. Once it's opened, you just can't do that. So there really is only one way to sort of move forward with it. But I think the other thing to be aware of is often the law of intended consequences with these things as well. The tech is created for a particular purpose. Whether it ends up in that purpose is, well, generally it doesn't. There's a great anecdotal example. I was hearing about this. So the printing press, Gutenberg, so that was mid-15th century. So he created the printing press for the purpose of creating Bibles. So Gutenberg Bibles, that was his thing. He was a very, very strong Catholic and wanted to take the word to many, many more people. And pre that, you had monasteries and monks writing out the books, and the printing press enabled a huge growth in terms of books and learning in his mind to further sort of the Catholic Church. But in reality, what happened was books were created, not just the Bibles, but everything else. And so what that then took was a lot of learning to individuals about science, about tech. Often there are examples of where tech has come along and it's never quite been used for what it was intended for. And I think we're going to see that. And as it becomes more adopted, I think people are going to be able to identify different opportunities for it and to be able to use it.
Yeah, it takes me back to a conversation I was having with some friends a couple of nights ago, and one of the friends is a doctor, and the impacts of AI on surgery and moving forward. And another friend was in a completely different industry, and he was like, "So, what are you going to do? What's going to happen to all the jobs if AI is coming in and automating?" That's her initial mindset, and the response was, in many cases, we don't know. But back to your point earlier, if you look back 10 years ago, some of the big roles and jobs that are out there at the moment, big opportunities that are out there at the moment, it wasn't even a figment of someone's imagination, was it? It just wasn't there. So you just have to evolve and see the opportunity rather than the threat. And understand that actually, if you evolve, if you start looking for the opportunity, the likelihood is you'll be fine. There'll be lots of opportunities, there'll be lots of new things that you can get involved in. It's probably a lot more interesting than doing the day-to-day sort of grunge work that a lot of people are doing at the moment that AI is going to remove. And it is a mindset thing, isn't it? I think for many people.
It is a mindset thing. It is a mindset thing, but recognizing, as you say, my grandma, Yorkshire woman. I don't think she ever set foot outside of Yorkshire her entire life, but she always used to say, "Where there's muck, there's brass." Where there's something there's opportunity in it, essentially. And often, sometimes in those roles which aren't seen as being the shiniest and the nicest of opportunities as well, that there are things that you can do with it, but you have to be open to the opportunities when they come along and take them. But also, I think you have to do that in the right way. What we teach our guys with regards to AI is that it's not a silver bullet. It's not a magic pill. It's not magic. It's just maths. Because I think if you don't think that, then people can believe that it's something that it isn't and that it is magic. And not be aware of the constraints of it, or what it can and can't do, or the fact that when you look at some of the LLMs, that they can hallucinate, they can produce incorrect data, they can incorporate, they can bring in biases from the training data that they were based on. And I think so much of that is about understanding that and the risk. If you use AI to generate a couple of paragraphs of text for something, for a website or something, or it's you using it to take some meeting minutes and reduce them or something like that, you can instantly see the results and know whether it's fit for purpose. But if you're getting it to write code, there could be all kinds of issues with holes in that code, vulnerabilities created in it. So, and so I think it's really important to understand that. And if you're just using data, for example, where is that data going? How's it being used? What are the T's and C's around how that data will be? Who owns that data? What else is that data to be used for? All of these things are questions which, if you're not careful and you just adopt something, then you risk coming unstuck quite quickly. But great that your audience are change managers and they're change professionals, because for them this is bread and butter stuff. You start small with sort of narrow proof of concept to pilot, so generate the value, demonstrate value, and then you win the right to have the next conversation with something a little bit bigger. Don't bet the farm on it straight off and then be surprised if it doesn't work out in the way that you intended it.
Yeah, and it comes back to what we spoke about earlier, isn't it? It's let's be clear about what we're trying to do here and get clear about the turning, get clear about that point B that we're moving towards. And I think if you focus upon those outcomes, then actually there's probably multiple ways of getting there, and you probably won't choose the right way in the first instance. So you've got to be quite agile and learn as you go along, spot those deficiencies, and start to, as you say, look at filling those gaps. Because if you just go blindly saying, "Yeah, this is where we're going to," there's a one-line way to get there, and I'm going headlong, the likelihood is you just fail, because you won't
completely
count the people, the process, the data, the technology. It's part of the process that I've built within the transformation leaders body of knowledge, which is my shoulder. This 9-pillar framework, and wherever the transformation, the catalyst for the transformation is coming from, you've got to look through the lens of the 9 pillars for it, and adapt and develop the program of work aligned to those 9 pillars. Because if you just look at it through one lens, the likelihood is you miss things that's happening in the other lenses, and it won't be successful. And if you look back over history on change programs, transformation programs, and the volume of those that don't deliver what they originally set out to deliver, or are massively over budget or significantly delayed, it's because they've not looked at the whole thing in the round.
Completely. And I think you're right, looking at that whole thing in the round and being aware of everything is critical to success. And I think that's where AI can help as well. It's very good of sometimes setting it clear objectives to say, this is what we want you to do, and then you're able to see whether it's successful or not in that. But also it's pretty good at being able to take the vast quantities of data that programs sort of create, and to be able to analyze those, to sort of see patterns and structural data that people can't see, but then flag those up of interest to humans, so that they're then able to look at that and see if there's anything in it, and then develop those insights off the back of it, and then maybe make informed decisions, armed with insights that they wouldn't have been able to get before. So I think that's an interesting area, particularly in planning and in project management and everything around that. But I think as well, we're going to see it become maybe a little bit bigger and wider in its remit. There's a lot of stuff around sort of being able to analyze messaging going on, so to be able to look at an organization and see how well that change is going down. Are there challenges with it? Are there common themes in terms of issues that people are seeing? I think there's a potential to be able to provide so much more information to those change professionals to be able to make.
We're working on something within a specific sector. The regulator is stipulating that a much more sort of customer focus is required, and clarifying that actually customer focus isn't just about responding to complaints quickly or within an agreed service level agreement. It's about actually understanding what those complaints are, looking for trends, and then changing what you do to solve those, so to ensure that they don't. Just one part of the regulation, obviously. but the challenge is for lots of organizations in that space is that they've got data, some formal data, some informal data, some just discussions that are all trying to come together to understand what the real issues are. But there's a real
Yeah.
plan, and we're working on that play to say, okay, this is just data. Maybe conversation might be formal database type of data that you've got because it's come in, or lots of informal conversations that you've been having, or informal sort of data sources. But actually, there is a tool over here that can actually start to look at those and pull out those key themes and help inform a more structured conversation within the organization. Not going to give you the solution, but it's going to help pull that together, pull out the relevant strands of information and provide something that can be the basis of some intelligent conversation. And I think that certainly in the short term, that's where I think there can be some massive benefits. But as you say, if you think that I'm just going to throw all of this data into this melting pot and suddenly it's going to come out and say, this is what I've got to do, that's probably a step too far.
Completely. I mean, you said earlier the whole people, process, tech, and data thing. So often organisations, if they're not careful, if you risk just jumping straight in at that sort of AI relearning level without having a clear understanding of what data you have, the format it's in, where it resides, whether it's good data, whether there are problems with it, whether it needs to be cleansed, where it's stored, and then ultimately how you're going to, working out what it is that you need to access quickly and working on having a strategy for where that data ends up, essentially. And I think some of that is just driven by business need, but also as well, you mentioned finance as well. Regulatory requirements often require you to then keep this data, and if you're generating more and more data and that needs to be kept, then great news for the likes of AWS and some of the other sort of cloud providers where this stuff resides. But essentially, it's data first. That has to be right. Otherwise, old adage of you're building on the sand, essentially, and what you have isn't going to be sustainable and will, if not fail, then certainly you will miss something.
So just coming to a close, in terms of our audience, those people operating in change and transformation, what would be your sort of message that you want to convey in terms of the things that they should focus in on from your sort of through your lens and focus that we've spoken about today?
Sure. So through our lens, in terms of change professionals, we're seeing change in the industry. We're seeing change in the roles. We're seeing a change in requirement in terms of the people that need to work in those roles and what's being asked of them. And essentially, in terms of the types of people and where you source them from. To your point of individuals just falling into it, there are solutions out there where you're able to have a bit more focus and rigor around that, so actually end up with the individuals working for you in the organization that have the aptitude for it, enjoy the role, that have the skills for it, and that are able to adapt and have that sort of learning mindset built in so they can accommodate the changing roles in the future. AI is one automation technology. There are others, but I feel personally that AI isn't some flash in the pan thing, that it's here to stay. The organizations are going to need to work with it and implement it, not necessarily to stay ahead, just to stay current, I think. And that needs to be done in the right way. You need to work with a partner who's able to work with you to understand those requirements, have that clarity of vision, exactly as you mentioned there, in terms of where you need to get to, but to be able to implement something which sort of starts small and can grow and is successful. And I think that's the key points from my point of view. Obviously those are things that I mentioned AWS there. We do partner with AWS. We're just in the process of generative AI accredited partner as well. That's quite a new thing for them, and certainly something that will be focused on. But yeah, change is coming, definitely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Ash. It's a really interesting conversation. Hopefully you found that too, and hopefully the audience has engage with it. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, Tony. Thank you.
A quick note about the transformation leader's body of knowledge. I love this quote from one satisfied customer. It's like having a highly experienced mentor by your side 24/7, providing expert guidance on all things transformation. Click on the link below to get your copy and to accelerate your journey to becoming a transformational leader. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to subscribe and join the conversation. Your voice matters, and by subscribing, you'll not only stay up to date on our latest content, but also contribute to the ongoing debate around what it takes to lead successful transformations. Don't forget to grab your copy of the Transformation Leader's Body of Knowledge. It's a must-have resource for anyone serious about mastering change leadership. The link is in the description below. And while you're at it, check out the Transformation Leaders Hub, the #1 global community for those working in change and transformation. See the link below. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.